Welcome to the Podkey Summary of Live Activities Essentials from WWDC 2026. Today's update is all about how live activities are spreading out across Apple's ecosystem and what developers have to do to make that feel smooth instead of cramped, clipped, or confusing. The big picture is pretty appealing. Build an activity once on iPhone, and it can show up on Apple Watch, in the Mac menu bar, in CarPlay, in the Smart Stack, and across more dynamic island situations too. Under that nice seamless surface, a lot of the work is really about restraint. Keeping the data model clean, deciding what deserves to be glanceable, and swapping in simpler layouts when space gets tight. One of the most useful changes here is cross-device propagation. If a live activity starts on iPhone, it can now automatically appear in a bunch of other places. Apple Watch, the Mac menu bar, CarPlay, and the Smart Stack. That's great for users, because the information follows them around instead of staying trapped on one screen. And it's great for developers because they don't have to build a separate activity system for every form factor. Implement it once, and the system forwards it along. A lot of this works well, because live activities separate static information from changing information. The fixed stuff lives in activity attributes. Think coffee shop name, the drink you ordered, things that aren't supposed to change once the activity starts. The moving parts go into content state, like the order phase, remaining time, or even a rating. Only content state can change while the activity is alive, which means the system can push quick updates without resenting a bunch of immutable data every time. It's one of those design choices that sounds technical, but really it just keeps updates efficient and predictable. The design guidance here is pretty clear. Compact and minimal views need to carry only the essentials. If somebody is glancing at the dynamic island or a tiny slot on another device, they need the core signal immediately. So the critical fields, like a drink icon or an order phase label, should be mapped into those small leading and trailing areas where they can be understood fast. The richer detail belongs in the expanded dynamic island or on the lock screen, where there's room to breathe. It's a nice reminder that more data is not automatically more useful, especially on something people are seeing out of the corner of their eye. iOS 27 also broadens where dynamic island content can show up. Live activities now appear in both portrait and landscape on supported iPhones, which gives them more visibility but also creates new layout headaches. Landscape, in particular, can squeeze the compact views down harder than you might expect. So developers need to account for those different width constraints, instead of assuming one compact layout will survive every orientation. There's a very practical example of that with the dynamic island width limitation. In iOS 27, compact views can shrink in landscape, and developers can check the eye's dynamic island limited width environment value to know when that's happening. The demo solution is simple and smart. If there isn't enough room, replace a time estimate label with a plain progress icon. That avoids ugly truncation, keeps the view readable, and still gives the user a meaningful signal. Sometimes good interface design is just knowing when to say less. Standby adds another presentation wrinkle. When the phone is charging in landscape, the default lock screen gradient can look oddly small behind a live activity. The way around that is to use the Shows Widget Container Background Environment flag, so a full screen gradient is applied only on the lock screen, where that makes sense. In other contexts, developers can use the Activity Background Tint modifier to get an edge-to-edge background color. The result is a cleaner, more consistent look, without those awkward empty areas that make the whole thing feel unfinished. The same idea carries over to the smallest activity family. If developers declare support for the .small activity family, they're telling the system this view is actually optimized for very small surfaces like Apple Watch and CarPlay. Without that, the default lock screen layout can end up clipped on those tiny screens. Using the activity family environment value, they can swap in a custom view specifically for the .small case. That's the difference between a design that technically appears everywhere and one that actually looks at home everywhere. Another useful layer here is interactivity through app intents. Buttons inside a live activity can trigger an intent, like a rate drink intent, directly from the dynamic island or lock screen. When the user taps it, the system runs the intents perform method, and that can handle whatever the app needs. A server update, a database write, or some other custom action. So instead of the live activity being a passive status badge, it can become a lightweight control surface. That's a pretty nice upgrade for moments when opening the full app would feel like overkill. On the update side, there are really two lanes. If a huge number of people are all watching the same state change, a broadcast channel lets the server send one update efficiently to hundreds or thousands of concurrent activities. If the update is specific to one person or one activity, then the app can use a per-activity push token and send a targeted notification instead. So developers get a clean split between scale and precision, depending on whether the information is shared or personal. There's also a small but important detail around stale data. A content state can include a stale date, which tells the system when the displayed information should be treated as out of date. In the coffee order example, they leave stale date out. But if the estimated ready time expires, adding one would let the activity transition gracefully and show that the content is no longer fresh. That's the kind of detail that keeps a live activity from feeling weirdly frozen in time. The through line in all of this is pretty straightforward. Live activities are showing up in more places, and the best versions are the ones that stay simple, adapt to the space they're given, and update efficiently. If you can glance at it on a watch, in a car, on a Mac, or sideways on a charging phone and still get the point instantly, that's the win. And yes, if your coffee can now follow you across 5 screens, the least it can do is be on time. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.